DW Africa Link. This is DW's Africa Link program, your number one spot for all the latest news and information from around the world. I'm Isaac Mugabi.
And I am Eddie Micah Jr. We're live from our studios here in Bonn, Germany. You can also follow us through our partner stations across the continent, and we're live on our Facebook page, that's DW Africa.
Coming up, a joint investigation by both the UN and Ethiopian Human Rights Commissions into abuses committed in Ethiopia's Tigray region has warned of possible war crimes and crimes against humanity.
There are reports of shelling and airstrikes resulting in civilian death, summary executions, large-scale displacement, and a worsening humanitarian situation.
Residents in the capital, Addis Ababa, are also worried that the Tigrayan fighters might soon overrun the capital soon, like they did in other parts of the country.
Some insurgents have entered the capital. We need to identify them. Otherwise, I don't doubt that what happened in Dissay will happen in Debre Bahan and Addis Ababa.
Well, it's going to be an action-packed show, so don't go away.
But before all the details to the big stories of the day, let's go check out what's latest around the world.
DW News.
Hello, I'm Keith Walker with the DW News. A UN report on human rights violations in Tigray holds both sides responsible for committing gross abuses, government troops and Tigrayan forces. It even warned of possible crimes against humanity. There's more on this story coming up on Africa Link. As the COP26 climate conference continues in Glasgow, southern Madagascar has been paying what the United Nations describes as the highest price of malnutrition induced from climate change. The deputy director of the World Food Programme in Madagascar explains.
Because of the drought, because of the sandstorms, this is a new phenomenon that has manifested itself in the last couple of years. Prices are skyrocketing because of the very poor agricultural production, and people do not have enough food to eat. They do not have enough money to have access to the food, and malnutrition rates are augmenting. These people have not contributed to climate change, but they're paying probably the highest price.
This news comes to you from Germany's international broadcaster, DW. The death toll from a building that collapsed this week in Lagos, Nigeria, has risen to 22. The high-rise apartment block was under construction when it fell on itself. Distraught family members have gathered at the site as rescue workers continue to search for survivors. The property's owner has been arrested. 9 people have been killed in clashes in Democratic Republic of Congo's eastern city of Bukavu after an incursion by unidentified gunmen earlier today, according to authorities and the army. Patrice Chitera reports.
According to witnesses, gunmen started pouring into Bukavu city on Wednesday just after midnight. Heavy gunshot ensued suddenly, with some residents witnessing the flag of an armed group that was threatening to attack the city a few days ago. Residents shared some audio testimonies from the rebels who were urging them to join them to fight for the liberation of the country. Authorities say they've brought the situation under control.
German NGO CI says it rescued more than 300 people on Tuesday in the central Mediterranean Sea off Libya. CI is currently operating with 2 ships to locate and rescue migrants and refugees trying to cross the Mediterranean from northern Africa to Europe. Among those rescued were more than 150 children and 31 women. Finally, Germany's health minister has warned that the coronavirus pandemic is far from over and that the 4th wave is now hitting the country with full force. COVID cases have been rising significantly in Germany, as has the number of COVID patients in intensive care. And you can get more news on our website, dw.com. You can also join in the conversation on facebook.com/DW Africa. I'm Keith Walker.
And you're listening to DW's Africa Link program coming to you live from our studios here in Bonn, Germany, the heart of Europe. Once again, I'm Isaac Mugabi.
And I am Eddie Micah Jr. Remember, you can be a part of the show. All you have to do is to go to our Facebook page, DW Africa, and tell us what you think about the stories in the comments section. And I already see some of you tuned in, commenting already. Mahmoud Drame say you're listening from the Gambia. Monjirena says hello back at you. Peter Mariak says you're watching from South Sudan. It's good to have people all across the continent. You're very welcome to the program.
Thanks, Eddie, for the warm welcome. We begin the show today in Ethiopia, that has been marking a year since the war or conflict in the Tigray region began.
That's right, Isaac. Now, a joint report by both the UN and the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission says the Tigrayan conflict in the northern part of Ethiopia has been marked by extreme brutality, and all sides in the conflict could be blamed for war crimes.
We have a lot to tell you about this particular story in a moment. Our correspondent in the capital, Addis Ababa, will tell us more on the situation on the ground. But first, here's Zahardin Omar telling us more about the UN and Ethiopian report.
The report published this Wednesday examines the devastating impact of the conflict. It details a series of human rights violations and abuses, including extrajudicial executions, torture, sexual and gender-based violence against civilians. While releasing the report, UN Human Rights Chief Michelle Bachelet warned about an alarming lack of transparency in the crisis.
We are receiving continued allegations of serious abuses and violations of international human rights and international humanitarian law. There are reports of shelling and airstrikes resulting in civilian death, summary executions, large-scale displacement, and a worsening humanitarian situation. As ever, there is an urgent need for a serious, inclusive dialogue with a genuine intention on all sides to reduce tensions, avoid more civilian suffering, and find peaceful solutions.
The UN Human Rights Chief stopped short of mentioning who takes the bigger blame among the warring parties. Meanwhile, Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has made a fresh pledge of defeating the Tigrayan forces in his address to mark the first year of the Tigrayan conflict.
The pit which is dug will be very deep. It will be where the enemy is buried, not where Ethiopia disintegrates. We will bury this enemy with our blood and bones and make the glory of Ethiopia high again.
Addis Ababa residents like Azermi Uberhim are worried that Tigrayan insurgents have infiltrated the capital, and it could be a matter of time before they overrun it as they did in other towns.
Some insurgents have entered the capital. We need to identify them. Otherwise, I don't doubt that what happened in Disay will happen in Debre Bahan and Addis Ababa. These people are eating and drinking with us, and they are enemies of Ethiopia.
The conflict has left about 400,000 people in Tigray facing hunger, killed thousands of civilians, and forced more than 2.5 million people in northern Ethiopia to flee their homes.
Zahrin Omar with that report, and Eddie, reports coming in suggest that there's an ongoing purge of people perceived to be, spies in the capital Addis Ababa, and particularly Tigrayans. The police is out arresting them, and it's a story that we are also monitoring here at Africa Link.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's unfortunate, but the situation seems to be escalating, and it obviously gives room for spies, as you rightly said, because who do you trust in such a situation? Are you a believer on the Tigrayan side, or do you support the federal government?
And it's always rare moments that we have a joint report by the UN and also another body within the country investigating atrocities, investigating human rights abuses within the country.
Exactly. Well, the billion-dollar question, though, Isaac, will be what happens next. The report is out. We know the atrocities. What happens next? But for more on the sticking points of the joint UN investigations on human rights abuses in Ethiopia, DW's Kate Hassan spoke to Masoud Gebeyehu. He's Executive Director, Consortium of Ethiopian Human Rights Organization.
The most important aspect of this study is that all the parties who have been involved in this conflict have been pointed out that they are accountable for the violation of human rights, even if the degree varies from one to the other.
What kind of violations are we talking about here that are mentioned in this new report?
For instance, there have been attacks against civilians that have been documented, extrajudicial killings, torture committed, and also widespread arbitrary detention, pillage, looting, sexual, gender-based violence for displacement, and also violation of humanitarian law, violation against the rights of refugees, that there have been the presence of the Eritrean Defense Force and the Tigray Special Force around the refugee campus, and this all were found to be violation of the basic human rights and humanitarian law, as well as refugee laws. So the most important point that I see from the recommendations and from the findings is that everyone who engaged in these violations of human rights to be brought to justice.
This report was jointly investigated by the United Nations and Ethiopia's Human Rights Commission, and it's attracted lots of attention. Why is that?
This report has long been waited by the international community, the human rights community, because there have been lots of allegations of serious human rights violations. And even if it is today that this report is released, even if we didn't have read the detail line by line, this is a good start.
So the report's now been released. What's the next step?
All the stakeholders, civil societies, the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, the Ethiopian government, and the international community also should support the Ethiopian government as well as the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission to fully execute the recommendations and work together for the accountability of the human rights violations, as well as help both all the parties who are engaged in this conflict to cease the hostilities and find durable solutions for the conflict that is happening and is still expanding to the Amhara and the Afar regions.
That was Masoud Gebeyehu, Executive Director, Consortium of Ethiopian Human Rights Organizations, speaking to DW's Kate Hessen.
Now, Daniel Bekele, he is the head of Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. He has been telling DW that all sides of Ethiopia's Tigray conflict committed violations.
All parties in the conflict, which includes Ethiopian forces, Eritrean forces, and the Tigrayan forces, along with their allied militia, are credibly implicated with serious human rights violations and abuses, including targeting civilians, extrajudicial killings and torture, displacement, as well as quite a brutal sexual and gender-based violence. So all parties to the conflict are implicated with all these serious human rights violations, which may amount to crimes against humanity or war crimes.
Daniel Bekele, the head of Ethiopian Human Rights Commission.
Now, the capital city of Ethiopia, Addis Ababa, is under tension after the government declared a state of emergency. Rebel forces have threatened to enter the capital.
And this is what is worrying residents there. Well, Eddie, the state of emergency is expected to be approved by Parliament within the next 48 hours. Now, let's change gear and go to our correspondent in the capital, Addis Ababa, Koleta Wanjohi, with the latest.
A year on into the conflict in Ethiopia's north, the situation is more intense. The government of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is determined more than ever to get victory over the Tigray People's Liberation Front through the battle. But the rebels are not ready to lay down their arms. They have captured cities about 400 kilometers to the capital, Addis Ababa, raising threats that they will take Addis Ababa. Residents in the capital expect curfews, random checks by security agencies, as well as heavy deployment after the state of emergency is approved by Parliament. Some, especially from the Tigray ethnic group, fear that the 6 months period will be used to crack down on them because of their background. Many are stocking up on food, speculating that if the rebels entered the city, there may be a shortage. Nobody knows when and even if the rebels will attempt to capture Addis Ababa.
Koleta Wanjohi with a short brief on the latest in the capital, Addis Ababa. Now, Eddie, we have comments, don't we?
We definitely do. Basically, as on our Facebook page, DW Africa, how do you see this conflict ending? Roger says, end this senseless war.
And Disso Nephew Disso, that's his name on Facebook. He says it's an internal conflict that was perpetuated by Western powers to achieve their personal interests.
Clovis Chefu says African governments should stop underrating minorities or opposition to their rule.
Well, Musoko Benson, Eddie, has a similar request. He says, African leaders, please end this war. And Kauki Henry, he's in Uganda, he says, intolerance in Africa will kill us all.
Keep those comments coming through on our Facebook page, DW Africa. Be a part of the show, right, Isaac?
Yes, that's indeed. Yeah.
This is Africa Link. Keep it locked. Now, if you just joined us, you're listening to your favorite program. That's DW's Africa Link. We're coming to you live from our studios here in Bonn, Germany. Eddie Micah Jr. is the name.
And once again, I'm Isaac Mugabi. Let me first bring you to speed. Our top story today is that a joint investigation by the UN and Ethiopian Human Rights Commission into abuses committed in Ethiopia's Tigray region has warned of possible war crimes and crimes against humanity, and all sides could be responsible. Now, Eddie, at this stage, it gives me pleasure also to welcome those following us on our Facebook page, DW Africa, because we'd like to hear from you. Well, Hossam Conte, you're saying war is not the answer, but solutions through dialogue means. And Kobe Panda, you're saying that you're listening from Ghana. And Lamfred, you say hello from Berlin and greetings to Abu Bakal. Abu Bakal Jallo is not here, but he's following you. Many thanks for that. We shall deliver the message. And Sophia Abia, we're also saying you're listening from Ghana.
Great. All of you guys are very welcome. Keep those comments coming through on our Facebook page, DW Africa. So here's what's coming up in the next 15 minutes. We'll be hearing how excited locals in northeastern Ghana are to have access to the internet and make telephone calls finally.
We were not having access to this privilege others are enjoying in other districts. Looking at other districts, they were making calls, sending mobile money.
Well, that's an interesting story, Eddie, that I'm looking forward to when, some people are just getting the internet right now and even being able to make calls. I think for me, this is a necessity. It's not a privilege like it should sound.
Yeah, and we'll definitely get to the details of that story in a bit. But first, let's go to Rwanda, where diplomatic efforts are underway to reopen the country's borders with neighboring Burundi and resume cross-border trade.
Well, for starters, Burundi closed its border 6 years ago after a failed coup against the late president, Pierre Nkurunziza, which he blamed on Rwanda. Alex Ngarambe reports from Kigali.
Business people and traders active on the border will finally be able to resume their activities, which were paralyzed for the last 6 years by the Cold War with the neighboring Burundi. Rwanda businessman Benjamin Murenzi explained why he's happy.
Before the closure, I also used to deal in foodstuffs, Irish potatoes, taking to Bujumbura, coming back with these small fish, and everything was fine. And all of a sudden, this closure came just abruptly. One of my trucks was trapped there. So resumption of trade between the two countries, also resumption of our lives.
Rwanda is a net importer of most of her consumable goods, mainly from neighboring East African countries, as well as from Europe and Asia. Burundi was one of Rwanda's biggest regional export markets. Resuming the trade will benefit the economies of both countries, Morenz told DW.
Like you can see, most of us who are dealing into this kind of trade, we've been redundant. We are taxpayers. We don't pay taxes. We are more of almost like beggars. We really our economic life has been interrupted with, and when the individual economic life fails, so the national economic life cannot be that strong.
Besides the coup attempt and closure of the borders, during the past 6 years, the two countries have mutually accused each other of forming and arming militia groups that have been attacking both territories. Economist and trade expert Teddy Kaberuka says that Burundians and Rwandans alike have suffered greatly because of the situation.
We've had some issues of security issues, some groups crossing the border, armed groups. But I assume by opening the border, the security issues are also on the agenda for both countries to address it and then minimize the losses, Losses are not only human, but also assets.
The closure of the borders by the member states of the East African community as a result of political disputes is against the EAC's rules because it hampers free movement of goods and labor. Reopening the Rwanda-Burundi border will ensure a much-needed smooth cross-border trade and help solve disputes diplomatically.
Alex Ngarambe with that report. And it's a story you've been following, Isaac.
Yes, indeed, I've been following this story well. I'll tell you something, but first let me acknowledge those commenting on this particular story. Birindwa Minyangu says it's good news for both countries. And Abdurrahman Mohammed Plane says it's a good decision.
Okay, Kakunguru Kenneth says everyone in the region is scared of the president Kagame, an autocrat who has mastered the art of, clearly very strong criticism against the president, which is quite welcome. This is how he sees this.
Well, Eddie, you're saying that you've been asking me whether I've been following this story. No, yes, I've been indeed following it up, and it's a positive step towards renewing relations between Burundi and Rwanda, where I come from. Many business people are upbeat that they're going to do business again after 6 years, because both these countries, everyone needs the other. You know, remember, none of these countries touches the coast like Kenya or Tanzania, so they need each other for cross-border trade. However, there's also a group of journalists from Burundi that crossed into Rwanda for safety reasons. And as you know, Rwanda is home to thousands of Burundian refugees who fled, you know. Now, there are fears that once these relations are renewed or are restored, Kigali or Kagame's government might be obliged to send back the journalists, you know,
that's the main
since
headache.
Burundi perceives them to be enemies of the state because of their work. You know, journalists have been persecuted, you know, all over the world. So
could dialogue be needed here?
Absolutely, protection, you know, is paramount in this case. But it's a story, of course, we keep monitoring. And once the borders open up, Africa Link will revisit this story.
For sure.
On the spot.
On the spot today takes us to northeastern Ghana, where communities' digital divide remains huge. The people in Union Town finally have access to the internet.
This is a positive story by all standards, Eddie. Well, according to the report, people used to have to climb hills or travel several kilometers just to place that important phone call. The community was left out of the digital world, like you mentioned. Now they can participate in online debates and follow the news. Maxwell Sook reports.
Customers surrounded Samuel Daglo, a young teacher who doubles as a mobile money agent at Yunyo, a farming community in northern Ghana. The recent access to cellular networks means a lot to people, Daglo told DW.
Making things now easy. Whoever comes, maximum 1 minute you are down with the person goes away. Unlike those days, you can be on one person more than closely 10 minutes because you do getting to the end, the network will fail you. You have to start all over again.
Charlie. Good afternoon, sir. Yeah, Charlie. I mean, you.
Nearby, a group of young people sat under a cashew tree using their phones. One of them, Musa Nangodi, said he felt very excited at this new connectivity.
We were not having access to this privilege others are enjoying in other districts. Looking at other districts, they were making calls, sending mobile money, doing their private calls and WhatsApping and then chatting, Twitter and all that. But we were just left out. It was a hell here.
Ghana was among the first countries in Africa to liberalize the telecommunications market in 1990. 2 years later, it was connected to the internet. Data available indicate that nearly 70% of Ghana's 30 million people are mobile subscribers. Now the people in Yunyo are part of the digital community too, said another young man, Abdul Rahman Nayuni.
If you don't monitor the internet, you wouldn't know that there is opportunity somewhere. Now I can sit in my room every morning, go to these jobs opportunities, platforms, and see if there is anything going on in Ghana.
It is not only the young and literate that are happy about being connected. Homemakers like Balibir Suleimana no longer struggles to reach her children in southern Ghana.
Initially, we were writing letters to our children each time we needed them because we didn't have the network in this community. But now that problem is over. Just press the phone and deliver your messages.
In 2004, Ghana enacted a program for accelerating development, which included the laying of fiber optic infrastructure throughout the country in the following years. IT experts like Amadou Samed Geda say the connectivity empowers the people.
Because that's where they will be able to learn beyond imagination. If you also deprive them of the internet, you are definitely not empowering them, because you can give them money, you can give them water, you can give them anything at all. But trust me, they will still lack the knowledge to make good use of whatever you are giving them.
Despite efforts made by authorities to extend internet to the whole national territory, nearly 15% of the population are still digitally excluded.
Maxwell Sook with that report, and we hope, Eddie, that such communities enjoy the benefits that come along, being connected to the digital world, like having the internet at your fingertips.
It's a right and they need to have it.
Yes, and it is a necessity. It's not a privilege. Tell us what you think, whether all your communities are digitally connected and have access to telephone lines by going to our Facebook page, DW Africa.
Living Planet Africa.
Now, the Niger Delta region is in Nigeria's southeast, was once an ecological paradise rich with unique wildlife.
Yeah, I like the way you make it sound that good, but it's really nothing positive to write home about now. Years of oil production have had a devastating impact on the area in the south of Nigeria. Oil spills and gas flaring are wreaking havoc on local communities and the landscape. For more on this, here's Eunice Wanjiru.
Nigeria's oil-rich Niger Delta is facing an environmental catastrophe. The air, the land, and the water have all become contaminated from oil and from the byproducts of its extraction. Christiana Elwozu has fished the waters next to Idu village in the Delta for more than 40 years. Recently, the fish have stopped biting.
Whenever it rains, the river water becomes thick and very dark. So when we cast our nets, there is no fish. In the last few years, you can see the gas has damaged the roof of my house. Everywhere is black.
The pollution comes from oil spills and from gas flares. This is when the natural gas associated with oil extraction is burned off. The gas flares spew pollutants into the air and also create toxic acid rain. The area around her village in Rivers State used to be brimming with wildlife, including elephants, antelope, leopards, and buffaloes. Now it's a barren and lifeless landscape, like many other parts of the Niger Delta. Illegal oil refining is partly responsible for much of the pollution, says Philip Shekwolo from Nigeria's Environment Ministry.
In a crude way of illegal refining, there are no scrubbers, there are nothing. Everything is, you see a heavy smoke being released into the atmosphere, very crude, heavy hydrocarbon emissions go into the atmosphere, and that's not good. And then the aquatic system is also heavily impacted because they just discharge the remnants into the sludges, the oil sludge into the water.
The Environment Ministry started a cleanup initiative in River State several years ago. It's been heavily criticized for doing too little, too late. There are some signs that the cleanup is making progress. Clement Gbaragbi, chief of nearby village, is happy with the work so far.
Both our aquatics, our crops, our water, our streams are contaminated. And now that they have come to do work now, I can see the seriousness of the work they are about doing. They are doing, of course. And I feel that by the time they do the work and back from the site, we will restore our land for us.
But an estimated 6.5 million people in the Niger Delta depend on fishing for their livelihoods. Millions of others rely on farming. And with the Delta now one of the most polluted places on Earth, the government isn't doing enough, environment groups say.
Eunice Wanjiru presenting that report.
And before we sign out, a reminder of our top story today: a joint investigation by the UN and the Ethiopian Human Rights Commissions into abuses committed in Ethiopia's Tigray region has warned of possible war crimes and crimes against humanity committed by all sides during the conflict. We've also been hearing about residents in the capital, Addis Ababa, who also worried that the Tigrayan fighters might soon overrun the capital soon, like they did in other parts of the country.
Yeah, as always, we'll be keeping you posted, giving you all the updates as and when it comes through. This is your trusted source for the latest.
And on that very note, we come to the end of the show. On behalf of the production crew and the rest of the Africa Link team, I'm Isaac Mugabi.
And I am Eddie Micah Jr. Thanks a lot for your time.